Could everyone please be seated? We're going to get started now. Thanks. Tom, come on down. So we're going to start off with President Tom Schutte. Thank you very much for all you've done here, really.
Okay.
More on that later.
Can I hug you now?
Okay, you can hug me. Is my mic still on? Okay, we're good.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Schutte, president of Pratt, and on behalf of Pratt Institute and the Pratt Center, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here. This is a very important event and a very important milestone for us, and we're so proud and very pleased to have Speaker Melissa Mark Beverito here this evening, joining us for this 50th birthday celebration. And I'd like to just note that the center has been a great model for all of us for leveraging university, college resources to help the surrounding community. And we've gone way beyond our gates thanks to the Pratt Center, and the speaker has been so instrumental in helping us do this. And it's part of our mission, it's part of our thinking, it's part of our planning. The Pratt Center was launched at a time when New York was down at the what? It really needed a lot. And New York was in dire straits. And we've been very proud of the fact that the Pratt Center has really helped lift New York and worked very tirelessly. And I must say that Pratt Institute as an institution was totally behind all these efforts and energies of the Pratt Center. There was tremendous abandonment of buildings. Buildings were empty. Communities were just beginning to organize to take the rebuilding of their neighborhoods into their own hands. The faculty and students in the School of Architecture jumped in and began helping community groups, offering their expertise in architecture and planning. And as a result, the Pratt Center has truly helped rebuild literally thousands of units of affordable housing and has done a tremendous job in revitalizing neighborhood shopping corridors. 50 years later, New York City has changed, as we all know, dramatically, and many residents are now struggling to stay in their neighborhoods and not be priced out. This is a very, very major issue for all of us. One of the ways to address this challenge is by retaining and creating well-paying jobs in urban manufacturing. So we're trying to repeat the original genius of Pratt Center and use the wealth of talents and energies of faculty and also our students in graphic design and communications and industrial design and even film and video production to help urban manufacturers improve their competitiveness, particularly their marketing capacity to reach more consumers and create local jobs. And I underscore create local jobs. This is very, very important, and we're really very, very focused on this. This year, the New York City Council provided $750,000 to support our Made in New York City branding campaign. This campaign has been tremendous and could never have happened without the backing, without the support and the encouragement of the City Council. There are over 1,300 local manufacturers today participating in this Made in New York City effort. And the Council's support provides many exciting opportunities to help them and their workers. Another way to keep housing affordable is by reducing energy consumption and costs. In addition, as the convening in Paris demonstrates today, there is no greater imperative than addressing climate change. Speaker Melissa Mark provided $1 million in funding for the Pratt Center's Energy Fit initiative, which is changing the way home energy retrofits can be done and could be dramatically reducing energy consumption in small homes. The speaker recognizes that Pratt Institute's commitment is a very, very important, broad, imperative service to broaden the New York community, and we could not ask for a better friend. So, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you have done. And I'd like to also say that from the standpoint of town and gown, this is a marvelous way to demonstrate how government, vis-a-vis our city council and its leadership, and Pratt as an educational institution with all of its faculty and all of its students and all of its commitment to the community can work together. So we thank you, and Adam, thank you also for helping us keep the Pratt Center moving and helping us with all of our relationships and linkages with City Council Melissa. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone here at Pratt Institute. Other shout-outs, Bruce Gitlin, Mike Pratt, and Gary Haddam, members of the board, are here who've been very supportive of us. You know, as Tom started to say, it's been a great relationship which has yielded this model for how universities can provide service to the communities surrounding them and beyond. Often copied, never duplicated. And I just want to say how lucky I feel to be here many times. Also, I wanted to thank all our sponsors, Con Ed, City, Public Works, for making this series possible, and the great team at Pratt Center who put this all together for Nepal and Sal and Marie and Ben. So a big hand for them. And let me, just so you all know, we hate doing events. It took us like 2 years to say, oh, we really need to recognize our 50th anniversary. This is really our 52nd, you know? But we're already planning for the next one. So, this is actually the last in our series of discussions on the evolution of community development. A little bit about its origins, but more about where it is today, what are the lessons learned, and where we're heading in the future. Our format is for me to just ask a couple of questions, kind of like the warm-up band, and then really try and facilitate a discussion, Q&A, of you all with the speaker. We are very privileged this evening to have Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito. President Schuette has already reported on how supportive she's been. I just wanted to add my gratitude. We could not be doing half the things that we are without the council support and the members' support. You know, before coming here, I was thinking about how many projects we're working in individual districts. Easily, at any given point in time, we're doing 5 or 6 projects in a district, plus things like BRT that impact on districts, but throughout the city. You should all read her bio, read the real record of accomplishments that she's already put together, but that's really not the big sentence, tonight. What this is really about is she is one of us. You know, she is a community activist. Her roots are in community. She was a community organizer, she was on the community board, she was a labor organizer, and she is an agent for change. And it's funny because I've worked for a bunch of electeds, and you normally don't think of the speaker, the role of the speaker is kind of an inside baseball game. It's inside City Hall. So it's an interesting dichotomy that you have to draw on the experiences of being engaged at the grassroots, at the community level, and now playing at a very different level. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, so what are the experiences that you took away from being a community organizer, and how maybe it's influencing your thinking now?
So first of all, thank you to Pratt Center for all the work that you do, and you've been a real partner for many, many years, even before I was speaker, in really some policy changes and looking at issues that really are at the heart of many of our communities. So thank you for that partnership. I guess we can just jump right into it. So you know, I still consider myself an organizer, and I still consider myself an activist.
But now you're organizing 52
right,
straight
right. So, you know, when I came into office, I really kind of embraced that idea of how do I continue to still really seek partnership and collaboration with organizations on the ground that are really making the change happen at the local level, and like bring that into like the governance structure in some way. And now as speaker, you know, just prior to becoming speaker, I was one of the few, for instance, of the first 4, now there's 28 of us, that were doing participatory budgeting. And when I decided to embrace that idea, concept of participatory budgeting, it's really, I've looked at it from the perspective of participatory governance, right? How do we bring in the constituents and the communities and the organizations that we work with and that we represent into the decision-making process? And that really is something that has changed my perspective, and I've very much embraced it. And when we look at anything that we're doing right now, I really look at it through that lens of, particularly when you talk about land use and when you talk about planning and when you talk about community development, is like how do you actually bring these organizations into the fold and organize on the ground to get the support to really help make the decisions that we need to make each and every day. So I really believe it's carried over, and it's helped me be a better legislator to really stay true to those roots. The reality is, though, that we're also operating within, you know, the belly of the beast in terms of governance and a government structure that at times can be very rigid. And although there are many of us in the council that are reformers and really outside of the box thinkers, you know, there's still certain aspects of the structure that are difficult, right, to really work around. And so that's the constant challenge that we have, and that's why it's really important that the grassroots organizations continue to do the work that you do, because it really is that advocacy and that movement on the ground that keeps us, right, on the right track, so to speak. So I still consider myself an activist. It really is part of what I do. I look at governance as a participatory process in which the constituents need to be a part of it. And it's not about alienating people, it's about bringing more people into the fold. And that's the way that I've led the city council internally, and that's the way that it governs the way that I look at the work that we need to do outside of the body as well.
So kind of a follow-up to that, for them to participate in that way, for them to be engaged, to be able to respond, to be able to come and meet and present the information that they need, it requires kind of a capacity building at the community level. And I was struck after Sandy how there was this rush, there was this realization that we need to strengthen the social infrastructure because they are the first people to respond. It's neighbors helping neighbors. And then when the mayor sort of began to reveal his affordable housing agenda, you know, I remember Vicky Bean going out, the deputy mayor going out and saying, we want to negotiate with communities. We want to hear their priorities so that we know what to offer or what to trade for in exchange for this greater density. And so when there's a crisis or when City Hall needs something, then there's got to be a strong community group there who can work with them. What happens in between? You know, it can't be just in responding to crisis. So how do we think about it? How do we begin to build up the capacity of community organizations the year round so that at the moments when the crisis occurs or when there's a new initiative, they have the capacity to respond and to be partners? Right.
No, and that's exactly kind of like where we find ourselves right now. When you talk about the conversation, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, the mandatory inclusionary housing and the CQA proposals that, you know, the way the press is reporting it have just been like knocked down by community boards and borough boards. But, you know, ultimately the process lies with us in the city council. And we believe, obviously we know there's going to be changes in the applications, but one of the things, and we were just having a conversation today in Democratic Conference, that at least from the administration side, there has been a commitment for more resources on the legal side, for instance. And we've put in a lot of money as a council on the legal services as well, so that communities that are experiencing some source of pressures, we can help build the infrastructure of local organizations that work to organize tenants, and that's what those resources can go for, so that tenants know what resources are available, and also build up the infrastructure of the legal service providers so that they can provide the legal services and the assistance that tenants need as those pressures start building in the communities in which they live. So we understand, and I know I do, about expanding the infrastructure. I represent a very low income district, one of the poorest in the city of New York, and a lot of the challenge for our local organizations is the capacity to really deal with the issues that our communities face. So I'm looking to, and we've been going through a process right now for the past 6 months, even though city planning has not even presented an application for a rezoning of East Harlem, we've engaged the community in a conversation about what is zoning, one, and just, having an understanding, but two, what kind of development do you want to see in the community? And that is going to be developed into a plan. We've had outside facilitators. We were able to get private funding into that conversation. Thousands of residents have been engaged in the district, and we're going to come out with a plan that has been community driven as to what is it that they want to see in their neighborhood. So when an application is submitted to the city, it incorporates the community defined needs, and that's really imperative, and I'm hoping that's a process other communities can engage in. But that's what we need to do in order to be effective in the work, in the work that we need to do, is help build the infrastructure of these organizations that are really on the front lines. And a lot of times we rely on some larger institutions, but at the local level, there are a lot of great grassroots organizations that just need a little bit additional support to do the work that they need to do. And we're kind of looking at putting that in place as we are going through this rezoning process.
So it's great that you turned to land use, because this is
Yes.
Pratt, and we're
Yes.
all about land use. And I would be remiss if I didn't do a shout out for your team. If folks don't know Raju and
Oh, yes,
Brian
yes.
and James, they are incredibly talented, mission-driven, strategic thinkers,
Yes, they're
and the
great.
rest of the policy team, including Sasha, have been great to work with. So going back to East Harlem then, do you think there is a evolving model for the process for land use change? Typically what happens, right, the community wants to talk about not only density, they want to talk about jobs, they want to talk about
Yes.
school seats,
Yes.
they want to talk about a whole variety of things.
Right.
And for the past 20 years, the response has been, that's beyond scope, we can't go there. And it's really everything that happens before ULURP that is absolutely critical
Right.
to the shaping of it. And can you talk a little bit about, do you see a model evolving? What sort of broader institutional change? I don't know if it requires a change in charter, but the balance between pre-ULURP and after ULURP, and so the community's role in getting up to, is it ripe yet? Is there a role for the city council in saying, this is not ripe yet for starting the clock?
Right. So I think that, in 8 years I was, council member under the Bloomberg administration, and now I'm the Blasio administration. So, when we were doing zoning, because I've gone through several rezonings in my district and land use deals, which require some zoning changes, there really was no look at infrastructure, right? At investing in infrastructure as a land use. Application was before us. The Bloomberg administration really did not have that. So you're bringing more density into a community, yet you're not looking at, more schools if needed, transportation infrastructure, and investing in transportation infrastructure. There was really limited look at that. And I think that's starting to really change, that as we discuss any sort of land use items, that is becoming much more at the forefront of the conversations as well. And how can we turn this into an opportunity that does generate jobs for the local residents? That does basically bring in more capacity into that community by building more seats or more classrooms, or building a more transportation infrastructure, or supporting and investing in the transportation. So those things are being looked at, and there has been historically, in terms of this last budget that we passed and we adopted, an incredible amount of money towards capital infrastructure, specifically because they're tying it into the areas of the rezoning that's happening across the city. That hadn't really been looked at in that way under the prior administration. Now, I think city planning can do a much better job of engaging communities, and I think that that's an area where they've really not done the best job, and it's being left to us right now, particularly with the mandatory inclusionary, to figure out how do we basically incorporate and bring the community into that conversation. But there is, I think, we're getting wiser as council members in terms of how do we incorporate and balance the community needs into the conversation of land use as we vote on these deals, and that's critical. You can't just do it in a vacuum. And I know that my district is constantly asking for opportunities and asking for investments that typically have not been part of the conversation. And the process that I described earlier, in which we are engaging in the 6-month dialogue and that will produce this plan, which is community-driven, is something that I'm going to take to the city and say, look, you haven't even submitted an application for rezoning for East Harlem, but look at this, and you've got to incorporate some of this in the thinking, because this is what the community is demanding. And so instead of waiting for a community to be fed an application, right, I want this to really turn it around and be community-driven to some extent, and that the needs of the community need to be part of the application before it's submitted. So I'm hoping to change, and turn the tables around a little bit.
Notice nobody objected to your comments about city planning.
Oh, yeah, I know.
But it is really a cultural change in
yeah.
how they perceive communities and their willingness to hear. It's not enough that they go out and have the community meeting, it's how they interpret that, and then it leads to change in their process.
Right, and I think it has to go beyond, when you look at the clock and you look at the calendar and the land use review process, the community boards have to have a mandated hearing, the board has to have a mandated hearing, city planning has to, but how do we go beyond the mandated hearing? And how do we engage communities in a broader conversation, and be proactive? And that's the challenge when we were talking today about this. The inclusionary zoning application is not going to come to the council until February, right? Not that that's that long away, but we're already talking about how do we begin a community engagement process even before February comes, before it even comes to us. That we start engaging in a conversation now, being more proactive with communities. That's what I like. That's what I think is important. And I think government has to start adapting and changing in the way that it enacts public policy and the way that it governs. And that's what we're trying to do, is really kind of shift the paradigm a little bit, as we go along.
I just want to ask one more question, then open it up. And it's really about gentrification. And it feels like New York is absolutely awash in cash. It's just rippling through neighborhoods. And, we all see it every day at the local level. In the past week, I think the New York Times has had 3 articles about gentrification, so it must be a thing.
Yeah.
But it strikes...
It didn't exist before.
Right. It strikes me somehow that we're not talking about the cause, which is really the great racial divide in our economy. It's that part of it that it's not just, if it was just communities changing, if it was just communities, going up in income, it would be unsettling. But I think the fact that that there's also a racial dynamic to it is what makes it so morally challenging, and so really offensive in a way. And to get back to that, to get back to the causes, we have to look at how do we make our economy more equitable? How do we increase access to education and resources? And I wonder, given that we're experiencing it on the community level, but the drivers are so much in our CBDs, what's the role of us as community activists in dealing with this issue? Are we dealing with the symptoms? Are we mitigating or remediating the symptoms? Or how do we get back to the real, what I perceive as being the real issue?
No, I think that is the real issue, and I think that, to kind of sit here and deny that there isn't, systemic prejudices that have been ingrained over time, right, and that's what we're trying to eradicate, is it's a hard challenge. And I think the conversation, I know it's been very heated, but the conversation that the city is engaging in right now, when you talk about the 2 school districts, that they're talking about changing the zoning in order to kind of desegregate some of these schools, really gets at the heart of it, right? And it's something that's really not easy to, but we're talking about increasing minimum wage, right? When we talk about the investments that we've made as a council to adult literacy so that we can provide opportunities to lower income communities. When we talk about the investments in pre-K, that's clearly important, right? To try to lessen that educational achievement gap, which is very real. You have to give kids, and all kids, kind of an equal starting point, and that's what the importance of universal pre-K is about. Although, we also have to start earlier than that. The 0 to 2 age range as well. But those are, I think, the challenges that this administration is seriously trying to tackle, and we got to be supportive of it. But the issues of minimum wage get at that, the issues of universal education, of desegregating our public schools, which we all know are very segregated. So those are the challenges that we have before us. And then on the housing front, which is a big issue, I was interviewed by 2 newspapers today, the Times actually, and the Wall Street Journal about this, because about the mandatory inclusionary zoning conversation we're having right now. And there are gonna be those in our communities that strictly say, and there may be some in this room, that say, oh no, we shouldn't do anything on the inclusionary zoning side, right? We should vote no on everything. I don't believe in that. I don't think that that's the right, you have to find out what the right balance is. But the article in the New York Times on weekend about Crown Heights, right? Crown Heights is a community that hasn't been looked at for rezoning. That's a community that really hasn't been, looked at, because some communities have been identified for rezonings, and the conversation is, well, once those communities have been identified, now speculation, and now that's where displacement happens. Crown Heights isn't a community that's been being looked at for rezoning, and yet displacement is happening already, right? So this is happening across all areas. And so what do we do as government? Do we figure out how do we utilize the tools available to us to figure out if there's a way of mitigating it? Or do we just let the market ride and just let it happen as it's been going? And I think that there's a role for us to play. And that's the balance we have to find, is like, what is that right approach with land use, with zoning, to try to provide opportunities to community residents, longstanding community residents that continue to live there and want to stay. And we're not going to solve it all, but I think that that's always the challenge that we have as leaders. And there may be times when we may take a position that some of our community residents may not be in favor with, but you're never going to please everybody, and that's the reality of this. But we have a larger challenge before us, and that's the level of debate and engagement we're getting at as a council. And obviously your voice in that is being factored in. We're hearing the voices of what the community boards are saying. We're hearing the voices of what the borough boards are saying, and that is going to factor into our decision making as we push the administration to reevaluate the application they've presented.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Questions? Let's open it up here. I really cannot see
I know,
anyone.
I know the lights we can put the audience a little bit in lights and dim them on us.
Oh, and we have mics that have to go around.
Thank you for being here. Again, part of the, I just came from a hearing at City Council in regards to urban gardens or urban ag, and how food plays a part, and an advisory board was proposed. And I was kind of talking about how at this point I feel like I almost need to get back and get arrested, because again, many community gardens are in front of the bulldozers with this administration, and I didn't think I have to be back in that place, especially knowing so much has changed, and I'm very, very grateful for all those changes and how participatory this particular administration and our representatives have been. So I just wanted to just say, I mean, again, what I was really asking is that why aren't we looking at like 1,000 more gardens with housing? Why aren't we looking at like 1 million trees, to have that agenda all over the world? People are figuring out how to create more green spaces so we can sustain ourselves. And there are very creative, amazing ways of doing it. And it's just a matter of putting our minds and desires. And I haven't seen that. I've seen like affordable housing, and then again, this is affordable housing for who, in this particular, where some of the gardens are in front of bulldozers. I just can see that the last few thousand, the last vacant lots that remain after 13,000 vacant lots have been into housing to create something that's inclusive. And I want to see where are we looking at that and how's that moving forward, of creating more green spaces alongside real affordable housing and community centers.
No, and that's a conversation that I think is important. And I know there are those of us council members that believe that we have to balance, as we are creating more density, that we need to also incorporate more green space. And that is a challenge itself, because some people don't agree with that, right? So right now there may not be like a universal approach to that issue, but there are council members that individually are interested, and as projects and developments happen, they try to make that balance. I've supported and preserved some of my community gardens in light of, of some development, and we continue to support that, but it's not a universal paradigm or, that we're operating under, but I think it's something that we should factor in. I agree.
I have two-part question. The first part of the question
If
is...
you can identify yourself, I don't know if you're with an
Oh.
organization or just an individual.
Oh, yeah, I'm just an individual. My name is Afua Ihigiator. I have a startup that's called Our Street that's trying to use community investment to create affordable housing. But I have a two-part question. The first part is, what are the people in East Harlem saying in your conversations? And the second part is, where do you see the balance now between community members and, I guess, developers or people like that? Because it seems like there's a group that's winning. So where do you see the balance now? So first, what do people in Harlem think? And where do you see the balance between?
Well, we're going through that process now. And again, it's something that just came out of me because of the way I operate and the way I want to interact with my constituents, that I want to engage them in the conversation. So we've had outside facilitators, and we've broken up into groups on housing, transportation, environment, health. You know, there have been all these working groups that have been engaging in conversations. And so it's a lot of the things that we would expect to hear, right, about wanting more affordability and that the levels of affordability really speak to the surrounding community instead of this like global number that at times doesn't really relate to the local communities. Issues of more green space, improving our schools, you know, things that you would expect. But now this is a roadmap that the community has defined that will be put into a formal plan that I will present and that will be presented and that I will utilize as I approach my decision making. But clearly there are those aspects, there are those in my community who believe in nothing happening. They don't want anything to happen, and I just don't agree with that. I think that there are steps that we can take to try to mitigate. There was an article yesterday that said that in terms of housing market right now, the most fast-paced sales are northern Manhattan, and this is again with nothing happening, and aspects of Brooklyn, which we already know is happening. So any real estate in this city is prime real estate at this point, particularly Manhattan. Even if you're in East Harlem, even if you're up in Washington Heights, it's prime real estate. So the gentrification and displacement, or the displacement of the pressures, are increasing and already exist. So the challenge for me is like, what can I bring in to try to address that and create more opportunities for my neighborhood? So. But it's the things that you're, but it's been a really great process. We have an active website if people want to check it out. We have social media, we've engaged, and it's been a really engaging process, which we've had over maybe 1,500 constituents participate in.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Renee Collymore, former district leader in the 57th Assembly District. Good evening, Madam
Hi,
Speaker.
how are
Thank
you
you for coming.
Thank you.
I have a question, and my question is, can you tell us why the City of New York does only 1% of contracting with women and minority businesses?
Well, I think it's a little higher than that, but it's still very low. Let me just say that. It's definitely nowhere near where we would like to be. And we've been having this ongoing challenge and push the administration. We've passed local laws. We cannot mandate a percentage of contracts. For whatever reason, legally, we don't have that authority, but obviously we've set some standards in place where we really challenge the administration that they've got to do better. They say that they feel that they're doing better, and they put some figures out, which others challenge. But there are some city agencies that actually do very well by MWBE. The Parks Department is one of them. I think even the School Construction Authority may be another. There are certain agencies that do a very good job. So it's like, why can't we figure out what works there and how other agencies can incorporate and meet those standards? So it is a problem, and I think that we have a lot of oversight hearings on this. We engage the administration a lot in the contracting process. I know Helen Rosenthal, who chairs the contracting committee, has addressed this a lot. And the administration has presented some benchmarks, which we'll take a look at. But I agree, there's a lot more work to be done. There's been some things that have been done about streamlining, I think, the certification process with the state, and things that could have been put in place to try to facilitate the certification, but there has to be more genuine commitment to get some of these contracts out to MWEs, without a doubt. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you on that.
Mike
It's
is the
lacking.
next one. Just to echo, or to jump in for a second,
Yeah.
I'm on the board of the Navy Yard, and they regularly achieve like 30–40% MWBEs on construction contracts. And I think part of the reason for that is every single board meeting, they have to answer, what did they do this quarter? And it's that sort of feedback loop and that sort of leadership, that makes it happen,
Right. There are
Mike,
people
I know
that are
Mike
really
had a
committed
question.
to it.
I can start with a loud voice. Mike Pratt, Vice Chair of the Board here and President of the Sherman Foundation. I wanted to ask you to go a little farther in talking about getting ahead of displacement, because we all are sort of, the market rushes ahead of plans as government considers and discusses with community, and that engagement is so critical. You referenced briefly the money that is pouring into landlord-tenant court representation for tenants, which is fabulous, moving us towards right to counsel. There are other citywide anti-displacement efforts and things that are out there. I wonder whether you could delve into both what you've already done and what you think can be done to sort of get ahead of the market, so to speak, since you reference how even in places where they're not talking about mandatory, or at least it's not clear which are going to be rezoned, there's also this enormous market pressure.
Well, I mean, a lot of it is, as we were saying about the infrastructure of existing organizations, to mobilize tenants and organize tenants, first of all, right? One thing is obviously having the money for legal resources so that the legal providers can hire more, lawyers to do that work, because the caseloads will increase, but also working on the organizing front to make sure that there are organizers out in the communities knocking on doors and letting people know what their rights are or their resources available. And that's also happening, but I think we have to ramp it up really quickly. And that's part of what that money is to go to, is to do both those things. Because a lot of residents don't know what their rights are. I mean, the number one issue that we get through our door in my district is housing, right? And a lot of times seniors that are being targeted by the landlord. So the organizing aspect is critical, about literally the door knocking, literally going into buildings and letting people know that they can call a phone number or a hotline. The city has been putting ads out on TV, I mean, people have seen the ads about the family, that the woman comes home and has an eviction notice and she's wondering what to do, and and then she calls the phone number and the phone number is a resource as to where she can go for help. And telling people don't wait, right? If you are concerned, engage earlier. So I think that level of awareness and having awareness campaigns is gonna really help, because you have to make this a conversation that is out there, and very present in people's lives. And so that's where I think we're heading. I just think we need to make it, happen. You guys got to put a little bit more oomph behind it, because there's a lot more pressure coming.
Do you think there's a legislative component to it as well? A lot of people talk about replicating the Clinton special district, so that there has
There's
to be
been conversations
certificate.
about that, and I think that that's factoring and coming into the conversation on the citywide inclusionary zoning, obviously. There's that conversation. There's also the issue about how we've been able to put harassment, into the housing law, and that if a tenant feels that they are being harassed, if they can keep documentation of the times the landlord has denied them services, et cetera, they could actually take the landlord to court and sue for harassment. So we've done certain things legislatively to try to really beef up the right, supporting tenants as they struggle with these challenges in their neighborhoods.
Question there?
Hello, my name is Ifoma Ebo. I work with the Office of the Chief Architect with the Department of Design and Construction, involved in research on equity and design. And I wonder, in your work in East Harlem and the South Bronx, whether there have been any issues regarding public facilities or infrastructure and issues on equity.
Issues of?
Equity.
I mean, can you give me like an example of what you might be referring to?
The quality of facilities, whether people feel comfortable using public facilities, whether they be libraries or police stations or even public plazas within their communities, the quality of those places and whether people feel comfortable using them, whether they're up to the levels of
Yeah. I mean, that really hasn't come up. I mean, like, we just created a public plaza on 125th Street. That hub there by Lexington Avenue was having a lot of challenges. So we created a public plaza, which has really been welcomed by the community, and they've embraced it. We've been putting some money into capital improvements of our public libraries. We have one on 125th Street, one on 110th Street, and also the one in the Bronx. The issue of access or concern. Obviously, there's always the idea of improving them, investing more money, right, and making them better or expanding them so that they can serve more people. But I'm not sure I would say it's like a predominant part of the conversation. Obviously, more spaces, I think more open space is critical. We have a lack of that. I mean, we have, Randall's Island is included in my district, so that obviously kind of skews the numbers a little bit. But there's a real lack of open space in East Harlem and the South Bronx. And so investing in more opportunities to improve what is there and so that more people can access it is obviously definitely part of the conversation.
Now the hands are coming up. Yes, back there, yes. So purple top, green.
Yeah, the light is really.
Hi, I'm Karen Atlas, Arts and Democracy in Naturally Occurring Cultural Districts, New York.
yes.
And I wanted to ask a question about community-based culture as part of this important social infrastructure, and how, belonging is an important part of neighborhoods too, and the sense of feeling like you can participate in culture is all part of that. And we're about to have a citywide cultural plan done. And I guess my question is, how can we integrate that discussion about culture, community culture, into all of these plans rather than sort of putting the arts over there and culture? Are there ways that we can incorporate a broad sense of culture in the rezoning discussions and other things like that?
I mean, I think there is, but I know that we've incorporated, the arts in the community planning process that we've engaged in. So that's been a whole set of organizations and groups that are talking about how do we build and expand the cultural infrastructure of a community. But that's an interesting challenge. I would definitely want to go back and discuss it, but how do we incorporate that in a greater conversation of the land use process? It'd be interesting. If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. I'm a real supporter of the arts, particularly community, arts and organizations. I think it really helps improve. It's a way of validating communities. It's also a way of really recognizing, helping smaller organizations really be able to do the work that they do. We've invested a lot of money in different initiatives that support that. But I haven't really taken a look at how we can think about that in the greater context of like the zoning process and how would we incorporate that in the conversation. I would love to hear more about that. Have you discussed that and had ideas?
We're beginning to put together a blueprint
Okay.
how to do that, and I'm just curious where we're at, who we're running this blueprint for.
Well, now you know, right?
No,
Now you
that's
have an idea.
an interesting, yes, I got to go back and maybe consult a little bit more. That's an interesting conversation, I think. It's definitely a new part of the conversation. I haven't seen that incorporated in the past.
All right. Is that Wendy?
Cannot
I can see you.
at all. And these lights are getting really warm.
Yes. 2 more questions.
Hello.
Yeah.
My name is Humberto Martinez. I work over in East New York with the Cypress Hills Local Development Corporation. And, you talked about engaging the community during the pre-ULURP phase and as a way to open up the process of the ULURP public review process. And, in East New York, we're in the thick of it. We're at the second stage of the ULURP process where the borough president is looking over the plan. And us as a community.
Right, this is the local, right, the local zone.
Yeah, this is the local one. This is the
Yes.
East New York Community
Okay.
Plan. We're in the thick of it right now, and us as a community, we've really done this planning, pre-ULURP phase planning, and unfortunately, city planning hasn't done a great job to incorporate our hard work into the plan that was certified. And so my question for you is how would we, for communities like East New York that we're in thick of it, how can we use the ULURP process now to really make the plan that is going to be going through the process reflective of what the community wants?
Well, I mean, that's, so.
I have a second question.
The more local zoning, obviously, I mean, engaging with your local council members, because if it's now out of city planning and coming to us, now we've got a review period in which the council member can make additional changes to it. So is there a level of engagement that you've had with the local council member?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We're engaging our.
Right, so then the issue is before him now, and obviously, you know, we are a collegial body, and for the most part, we do defer to our colleagues with regards to the land use items in their districts. The same way that I want to respect, you know, as the councilman for East Harlem, for my colleagues to respect whatever decision I arrive at in consultation with my constituents. We usually do that with defer to other colleagues. And then obviously there's a citywide conversation, which is a conversation for all of us as a body. So I would definitely encourage you to engage with your local council member and go to the hearings that we'll have at the city council, but even now, the process of engaging with his office so that he knows and hears those concerns and could possibly advocate for them as he proceeds in those deliberations. We have our window is usually about 50 days. That's about 2 months, just shy of 2 months. So that's what I would say is to encourage that.
I had a second question about this process that's changing pre-ULURP. What reforms you think DCP needs to make for them to better their outreach and engagement to the community? What type of changes do DCP have to do in their culture?
I mean, there's, you know, organizational change is very hard a lot of times. And so I mean, we believe, obviously, at the community board level is the first step. So being able to engage vigorously and very thoughtfully and try to figure out ways that you can try to make this information, you know, more palatable. It's really technical. It's really difficult sometimes to even understand. I know I used to be a community board member, and then when I first came into the council, you know, the challenges, and it's over time and constant discussion of the same issues that you start to really understand it. So I think they just have to figure out a way to be, you know, more in the weeds with community boards and engage them more. I think the presentations that my understanding that they did to the community boards on the mandatory inclusionary was like 60 pages long, very technical. You know, the question and answers, it was really difficult to get through. So they've got to figure out how do they condense it and make it more user-friendly. And figure out ways to engage proactively with communities. And that's not something they're used to, I think. So yeah.
This goes to the sort of discussion earlier about
Right.
cultural change.
It's a culture
In a
change.
way, Cypress Hills is kind of unique because they were the first ones up.
Right.
And they were very well organized and very well planned. And I have to say, you know, we're part of a group of 5 technical assistance providers that are working with the community groups in the areas that have been targeted.
In the east,
Citywide, but including East New York. And in a way, because you were the first one up, you're still catching like the old guard, or you're still catching pre-remediation, you know, a pre-culture change, or you're somewhere at a different point in the process, and hopefully that's changing, you know, because it really was the ability to listen. You know, it wasn't that they weren't at the meetings, they were at the meetings. It's did they hear what was being said? And maybe that's now what's evolving in East Harlem and elsewhere, one hopes. Was there one more question? We have Mike, we have...
Steal it. You hear me?
Wendy, yeah.
You here? Hi, I'm Wendy Fleischer, and I'm from the Change Capital Fund, and we fund 5 organizations around the city in high-poverty neighborhoods, including Cypress Hills, LDC, and other strong community development corporations. And they provide services that are far-ranging in education, in workforce, in housing, in planning, in organizing, and responding to the zonings. And I think one idea that's come out of their work is that while they are kind of coordinating multi-strategies and multi-partners on the ground, they don't really have a counterpart in city government to go to. They have many, many different contracts with many different agencies, and when it's zoning, it's planning, and when it's workforce, it's SBS, and they're trying to kind of manage that on the ground, but that it would be useful to have at a high level in the mayor's office, a neighborhood person or institution or agency for them to go to coordinate and bring together the goals and aspirations of their neighborhood, and to help coordinate and streamline and bring in line all these kind of conflicting databases and requirements and regulatory issues that they have to struggle with. So I just wondered if you could comment on that, if you think
No, I
there's
think that's a
any
good
legs to that idea, or?
No, I think that's a good recommendation at the city level, because I would agree, that becomes a challenge. And so I mean, that's something that we can always take back to the administration and figure out if there's a way that they could restructure, especially for the way the rezonings are going in these conversations with neighborhoods, that instead of, like you're saying, having to deal with so many different, that there could be one centralized person that maybe has in their portfolio, right, access to all of that information, and that could just be that one point of entry for communities. I think that's a good recommendation. So we could definitely engage in a conversation with admin, whether that's at the city planning level or out of the mayor's office, you know, that they have to figure out a way to streamline this. Because it would also be more efficient for them as well, right, as the administration, instead of having to have all these different agencies having those multiple conversations. If one person is centralizing that information and figuring it out, it makes it easier for them as well. So I think that that's a good recommendation.
Thank you. And I think for high poverty neighborhoods, like
Yeah.
the ones we're in particular, it would be great.
That's true.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
I
Well,
think
thank
our
you.
time is up. A hearty Pratt, thank you. I hope you join us again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good